supporters? Are they going to follow what their leadership says, or are they going to follow this index here that we've seen, which suggests that lower social grades vote yes? We will see. We're looking for clues. It's going to be fascinating, Hugh.
Jeremy, thank you very much. Jeremy Vine there with a little more explanation. Well, here we are, part of the army of very hard workers we have here at the BBC headquarters. They're waiting for the results to come in. They will be feeding the results into our system, having a look at them, combing through them, looking for any trends. We know there's a record number of voters registered. Will that translate into a very high turnout? You have to go back to 1951 to get a turnout of over 82%. Big questions. I'm delighted that our friends on BBC World, our global audience, has just joined us. Thank you very much for joining, and I think we're in for a very exciting evening. Professor John Curtis is with me of Strathclyde University, leading our team of experts. Nice to see you again, John.
I see you here.
We're going to be hanging on your every word tonight. So, at this early stage, let me ask you what you're looking for. What are the earliest signals you're likely to get?
Well, the various earliest signals we're going to get is some indication of the turnout, and arguably, in a sense, that's one of the two most important results of the night. One of the things that the politicians hope that they would get out of this referendum is a decisive result. And one of the things that will help to ensure everybody agrees that it's decisive is if the vast majority of people in Scotland have voted. So therefore there can be no arguments about, oh well, not enough people voted, can we really be sure this is what people in Scotland think? Now, very early days, but the indications we've got from the odd count is it does look as though indeed we do have a very high turnout, and maybe that 81% record figure, it may well be surpassed. So to that extent at least, the good news is this may well be a referendum that everybody accepts as decisive. The bad news is, of course, is if a lot of people have voted, that count is going to take a little bit longer, and the earliest expectations we ever had were 1 o'clock. Maybe it's going to be later than that before we even get the very first result.
Oh, don't say that, John. I want people to keep on watching, OK, because we've got a big story to tell. And I think when those results come in, even the earliest ones, surely, will give us a few valuable signals. So let's just think about what you might expect as one of the earliest results and what that might tell us.
Well, certainly, for example, one of the smaller counties in Scotland, one of the smallest council areas is Clackmannan, where Alloa is the kind of principal town. Now, if there were to be a big no or a big yes vote in Clackmannan, that would give us a pretty good indication that perhaps either no or yes have won respectively. We think Clackmannan is the kind of place that now is not going to perhaps be a million miles away from what we would expect to find if Scotland, so far as Scotland as a whole is concerned. It won't necessarily be wholly reliable. And I think one of the things we do need to emphasise here is that because we've never had a referendum on this subject before, we can't be entirely sure which of the places where, for example, the yes side are going to particularly well, and which are the places where they're going to do particularly badly. Normally in a general election we say, oh, we've got Sunderland. Well, OK, we know Sunderland's a pretty strong Labour place, but the swing there is 2 or 3%, and we can begin to draw inferences. That's going to be much more difficult in this referendum. We're going to be much more circumspect, because we might think, for example, that Clackmannan may not be that far away from how Scotland votes as a whole, but there is no way in which we can be sure of that.
Final point at this stage, John. Glasgow, Edinburgh, hundreds of thousands of votes. We're going to have to wait for those, aren't we?
Indeed. The bigger, a rough rule is going to be the bigger the council, the more important it is, the longer we're going to have to wait. So therefore don't be surprised if in fact we have to get an awful lot of results in before we get anything very much in the way of a clear indication, because those early results are going to come from small councils, and we are going to be asking ourselves, well, hang on, that's interesting, but lots of big places to come. Can we necessarily rely on this information as an adequate guide?
John, we'll be talking lots during the night. Thank you very much. John Curtis from Strathclyde University. And John will be with his team providing us with lots of valuable tips and analysis throughout the night. Let's talk a little bit about the campaign. It's been remarkable. Just to see the level of engagement across all kinds of communities throughout Scotland. You can't go anywhere without someone asking you or telling you about their view on the referendum campaign. It's a level of engagement that, frankly, I've never seen before in 30 years of reporting, and all of my journalistic colleagues are saying the same thing, Andy Marr too. But, of course, when you're talking about something this important, when you're talking about stakes which are as high as these, it's maybe not surprising that from time to time, tempers have been slightly frayed.
I'm honoured to announce that on Thursday, the 18th of September 2020, Scotland, who wants independence, and the Prime Minister of the UK, who's trying to stop Scotland getting independence.
Thank you very, very much. And Scotland, stay with us.
I could not, as Chancellor, recommend that we could share the pound with an independent Scotland.
Any 8-year-old can tell you the flag of the country, the capital of a country and its currency. Now, I presume the flag's the Saltire. I assume our capital will still be Edinburgh, but you can't tell us what currency we'll have.
We've heard it tonight. They cannot stop us using the pound, the most important revelation of this debate this evening.
We want Scotland to win the yes vote, to separate from England.
I'll nominate David Cameron.
This weekend, a poll put the Yes campaign slightly ahead for the first time.
We are proposing that over the next few months, we agree a programme that the Scottish
Well, that gave you a pretty good sense of the campaign and the fact that there's been lots of energy and lots of passion. And that's not surprising because people have been debating the future of their nation and their country. So if you can't get passionate about that, well, there's not much hope for you, really, is there? An important reminder, a full results service available online. The address is bbc.co.uk/Scotland Decides. Plenty of information there on the individual counting areas. It's a very, very good site for you to have a look at. And on social media, look for @BBC Politics or look at the special Facebook page we've got, the BBC News Facebook page. Or if you're on other forms of social media, you have the hashtag IndieRef. That's probably the best known hashtag, isn't it? IndieRef. And that'll take you right into the stream, giving you all kinds of comments and news as we go on. I'm delighted to say that Douglas Alexander is with us for Labour and Fiona Hislop for the SNP, Scottish Cabinet Secretary for Culture and External Affairs, Douglas, Shadow Foreign Secretary. Thank you both for coming in.
Good evening.
Well, where do we start, Douglas? And just to talk really about, for you, what is at stake here?
This is much bigger than a general election. It's much bigger than party politics. I think the real question that many of us were looking at today when we saw the ballot paper was what kind of progress do we want for our nation? And it's fundamental, it's binary, and I think we can only welcome the fact that in our millions as Scots we've come out to cast our vote. I think the vote will be a historic high. I think it will be a historic judgment on a historic question. It's hard to find words that capture the scale and significance to those of us here in Scotland, not just of the campaign that we've experienced, but the consequences of the decision. The choice is for us as Scots, but the consequences will be felt in every part of these islands. This is huge.
It's great to be able to pay tribute, Fiona, isn't it, to the health and the vigour of the democratic process in Scotland?
Well, it's been hugely exciting, and remember, Scotland has been on a journey, the people of Scotland have been on a journey, and a few years ago some people didn't even want to have the debate, so the debate that some didn't want to have has now energised a nation, and the turnout is considerable. I think it will be way over 80%. I've seen that in my own eyes in my own constituency. And in terms of the engagement in the debate, it's helped people change politics. If it ever was, it no longer is an issue of politics of party. It is most certainly politics of people. And I think that's what many people find that are not from Scotland find hard to engage with, that this is not just about the Westminster system. This is about power, and power lying in the hands of the people. And for those precious hours today, the future and the power and the sovereignty of Scotland lay in the hands of the Scottish people. And that is an amazing achievement. But to do so in such a peaceful and considered and discursive and debate, the energy of the debate, I think it's a tribute to everybody, and I think we should recognise that.
I'm giving you warning. In a second, I'm going to ask you for your sense of, during the day, you must have picked up some vibes.
Yep.
Before that, Nick, I said earlier, and I explained to viewers, we don't have an exit poll, but there are some surveys around tonight, aren't there?
There's a last on-the-day poll. Very important distinction between an exit poll and a poll simply done on the day. It's not quite like every other poll, because the poll involves people who have voted, no one who hasn't made their mind up, as it were. People who have actually voted, took part in a YouGov poll, and the result out tonight is 54% no, 46% yes. So a clear no lead, quite a bit bigger than that we had earlier. And the underlying data suggests that in that churn that you get, there's some more movement from yeses to nos than there is to nos to yes. Because often we talked about people not knowing. When I travelled around Scotland, it wasn't many people saying, I haven't a clue. It was people veering between yes and no and maybe and perhaps. It was a genuine agonising decision. But just to stress, the reason that we're not putting too much on that poll, not only is it not an exit poll, this question has never been asked before, so we have no benchmark to test it before. We've never had a turnout like this before. We've never had 16 and 17-year-olds voting before. It's a very, very different to an election where we've got lots of past practice to judge from.
So with all of those qualifications, and let's face it, they're pretty big qualifications, would that kind of margin be in line with what you expect, Douglas, or not?
Listen, I think you need humility when you see turnouts of this level. We have no experience. I think the highest turnout previously in Scotland was around 80% in 1950. 51. So in that sense, it's far beyond any of our lifetimes. And in that sense, I think you need to have humility at this time in the evening. But my sense in the constituency today was that there were huge numbers of people coming out and voting no. Listen, this is just a different campaign. To try and give you a sense of it, honestly, this happened to me in Glasgow yesterday. A taxi driver said, if I stop the meter, will you explain the Barnett formula to me? Now, in what other election could that possibly ever happen? Jim Murphy, my colleague, tells the story of being at hen night in Glasgow recently. He was in a restaurant with his wife. A group arrived for the hen night. In between tequila shots, they were discussing the Barnett formula and the referendum. I've never experienced politics like this. People normally go to a restaurant during an election contest to get away from politics. Last Saturday evening, every single table was talking politics. It has been an extraordinary thing.
No one would disagree with that, Fiona. It has been remarkable. But just to go back, just to go back to those figures, I know it's just a survey. Would that be in any way in line with what you might expect or not?
No, I mean, I think I would trust the judgment of the Scottish people, and I think I would trust a poll, a real poll of 4.3 million people, I think, compared to anything else that we're hearing in the course of today.
But, I mean, from what you picked up in your own area today, what was your sense of things?
Well, I think it's interesting. I think there's been an underestimation of the undecideds, and the undecideds that haven't actually been undecided, they've just not decided yet, and there've been movement different ways. Most of it, in my experience, has been from no to yes, but a lot of people weighing up the issues, and I think some of the issues in the last few days about last-minute panics has also been counterproductive for the no perspective. But I think we'll see the results when they come through. But I think a lot of people saying, hang on, we're being taken for granted. Why is this all happening the last 2 days, 2 weeks? Why haven't we had this in the last 2 years? So a lot of those issues were coming out in terms of what people were saying. But the stories are fantastic. People who have never voted before, a guy 57 years old, never voted before and wants to come to the polling station. Young people, I had the honour of going to the polls with my 17-year-old son today, and he and his friends were coming and voting for the first time. He was making history twice, making a choice about the future of his country, but also being the first 17-year-old as part of a national voting system. So, these are change days.
I think we've all got taxi driver stories, haven't we? So the guy who drove me from Glasgow Central Station said that his partner, who's 50, had never voted before. She was voting for the first time. She was voting yes, and he was voting no. So there's a classic sort of tale of how people have been really thinking about it and really have reflected on the burden, I think, the responsibility of the decision. Talking about the responsibility of making a decision. I'm delighted to say that we have a group of people here with us from all parts of Scotland, different ages, different perspectives in terms of this debate. Can I just give you a very formal welcome, all of you? It's lovely to have you with us. And we're going to be chatting with you as the night goes on. And I'm sure that if Douglas and Fiona have things, or Nick and Sarah have things to say, they can too. John Hammerlink, I'm going to start with you, John. You're in the front row here. You're from South West Scotland, yes?
That's correct.
You're an entrepreneur.
Yes.
I think you're a Yes supporter.
I am indeed, yes.
OK, so we've established that. Can we talk about the campaign?
Sure.
Maybe not in terms of specific issues, all right?
OK.
Just talk about the nature of the campaign and what you've made of it.
Yeah.
And how it's engaged you.
Yeah. So actually, when the campaign began, I was actually living in London at the time. So when I kind of started looking at the difference between a yes and a no, I was kind of in the background of kind of a London setting. And at the very beginning, I was very much a no supporter. Right. But, you know, as I kind of read all the different arguments, I looked at, what other people were saying online, and I realised actually that a lot of the arguments that the Yes campaign were putting forward made an awful lot of sense. And then, towards the end, we started seeing more and more kind of mess-ups by the No campaign.
What would you call a mess-up?
Well, things like earlier in the month, the problem with RBS, where they actually made a massive mistake, and how they'd kind of put forward the news about RBS.
Was there a turning point for you? Was there a point, so in your transition from no to yes, was there a point where you thought, OK?
No, it was gradual. It was very much here's another fact that I didn't realise about Scotland. Oh, here's another thing that isn't often talked about.
Okay.
And then doing research based on that.
OK, John, thank you very much. Ruth Mackay, in the back row there. Ruth, thanks for coming in. Now, I think you've got a different perspective to John's. You're on the other side, aren't you?
Yes, I am, yeah.
OK, so just your perspective on the campaign then, your sense of how it's gone and, whether you think it's been a good, energising experience?
Yeah, no, I think it has been a fantastic experience. I personally have never been involved in politics or anything like this at all, and I felt very passionately about the issue and have become more and more involved, into the point that now I have decided myself that I'd like to be politically active, and the number of people that I've debated with, that I've met along the way, has been quite fascinating, and particularly for me as well, women who have now decided that they want to be more involved and politically active themselves. So I think it's been a phenomenal experience. It's been heated and it's been hard work, certainly coming as we get closer. That's certainly been the case, but I think it's absolutely fantastic. Even my 5-year-old is waiting to find out and excited about waking up to see whether the yeses or the noes have won. So I think it's tremendous. The main thing I would really hope is that we continue with this momentum, that we keep people this engaged after the vote tonight.
Can I ask you, so you hadn't been engaged in politics before, so how did it happen? Did someone just invite you to a meeting, or what happened?
Yes, actually, I had a meeting with Kezia Dugdale through business connections and such like, and she had invited me along to the launch of the Better Together campaign, and then I got a phone call saying, would you come along and maybe say something there? And that kind of started this huge ball rolling, and I've been very active in the campaign throughout. And one of the things that had really struck me was I never actually personally appreciated just how disengaged a lot of people were about politics, and were maybe uncomfortable about talking about it normally with even their family and friends. Yeah. And that really struck me, and I suddenly thought, this is really important that we have more people, more young people, more women actively involved in politics, and that stayed with me, so I definitely plan to do that.
Thank you very much. Point very well made. Anum Kaisar in the front row, nice to see you.
Yeah.
Now you're a Labour voter.
I am indeed.
But can I ask you which way you voted in this referendum?
I voted yes. You can't see my badge, but there we go.
Okay, there it is. Okay, it's quite clear. So, why did you, in effect, abandon the party's own stance then?
Well, the independence debate is so much bigger than party politics. It's not about the SNP, it's not about Alex Salmond or Nicola Sturgeon. It's about what's best for us and our future generations. And I started reading the devolution papers, didn't see much radical change. For the people of Scotland, we have so many large resources, and I just felt as if the devolution papers weren't going far enough, and started reading into independence and was totally swayed by the arguments. And the positivity of the Yes campaign is amazing.
Hold that thought for a second, because Douglas, possibly the fear for you has been that there are lots of people like Annam who are natural Labour supporters who've been swayed by the arguments of the Yes campaign.
I think to an extent, but equally we're finding a significant number of SNP voters who actually think we support them in Holyrood when they vote for Fiona and our colleagues, but instead are voting no in the referendum. So in that sense, I think all of us recognise there has been churn within political parties and beyond political parties in this campaign. And to come to the central point in terms of the involvement in politics, one of the great things about this referendum is it's liberated politics in Scotland from two myths. One is voting doesn't make any difference. Every single person in Scotland knows that this decision, one way or another, is going to make a big difference. And secondly, that all politicians are the same. And actually, it's been transparent during this campaign that there are very different political points of view being argued on both sides. And actually, I think that's both a great lesson for ourselves, but actually a great example for the rest of the United Kingdom as well.
OK. Amy Jo in the front row as well. And now, I think you're one of the 17-year-old voters, is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Nice to see you. Can I ask you how you voted?
I voted no this morning.
OK. And was that a decision you came to today, or had you already decided a while ago?
I think I've been a no supporter for the past year since the whole campaign started, but it's not something that I've been really set on. I've just naturally come to the decision of no as I've become more informed over the course of the year.
What was, for you, the strongest argument in the no campaign?
Just to sum it up in a word would be uncertainty. You know, even now I'm still a bit unclear on what's happening with currency. You know, we keep being told about, universities, that's going to be fantastic, but where the job's coming from after, we're just not told enough information. OK, lots of you will be waiting to come in, and I promise you I'll be back with you before too long. Thank you very much. Good contributions. Fiona, just on the last contribution there, I sense that, when the change went through, 16, 17-year-olds getting the vote, there was a real sense in some quarters that, that was because you expected most young people to vote yes. Is that right? That's rubbish. I mean, Winnie Ewing, when she was elected in 1967, talked about votes for 16 and 17-year-old. Angus Robertson, when he first got elected to Westminster in his first speech, spoke about it. So we'll put that to one side. But I think anybody who watched the debate the BBC had with the 8,000 young people, or 6,000, I think it was, would be under no illusion that these were well-informed, intelligent young people, and it was more about them. And as a 17-year-old said to me, this decision, we will have to live longer with this decision than the rest of you. And I think that's actually quite a wise perspective, that it is about the future. And, I think that's where the hope and the optimism, I think, has been very reflective in the Yes campaign. And I think the idea of sowing fear and uncertainty has been part of the problem with the No campaign. And, at the end of the day, how you do your politics is as important as what you do with your politics. And that's what I think we've shown with the whole campaign. How you do your politics can be different. And I think the points that women become more involved, organisations like Independence for Women really engaging with people on all sides. So I think one of the legacies that I expect to see there is more women, more young people, and less, with the greatest respect to Douglas, middle-aged men dominating our
Don't
politics.
Look at me. I thought that was a bit cruel. That was wounding.
Just briefly, it's one of those changes I think we've seen that it'll be very hard to reverse. In other words, there's now a generation of 16 and 17-year-olds who've had the vote. Try telling them, actually, you won't get a vote when it comes to choosing your Member of Parliament in Westminster. You won't get a vote when it comes to choosing your MSP at Holyrood. Imagine their friends, their relatives, the people they mix with at university, if they're down south, for example. They say, well, I've got a vote. Have you not got a vote? I think there's a whole series of things that this referendum has changed, regardless of the result, about the way politics is done.
Let's hold the thought for a second, because I'm keen to know what's going on in some of the counts. And if we think about Inverclyde, for example, great industrial heritage west of Glasgow, and Sally McNair is there for us in Greenock. Sally, can you give us any sense of how things are going?
Yes, Hugh. Well, I can tell you there's been a very, very high turnout. As you say, this is traditional Labour territory. It's built on shipbuilding, as you just said, and sugar refining. But there has been, those jobs have largely gone. Jeremy was talking earlier on about the importance of areas of deprivation and high unemployment and the significance of those. And certainly this is just such an area that the jobs have largely gone. There's very high deprivation here. There's been a very high turnout. We're told, unconfirmed, that in one district there was a 95% turnout. Obviously that's going to be confirmed much later on in the night. But the SNP have been campaigning very hard, not just recently, but for the past 18 months, a series of very well-attended community hall meetings. Labour MP Ian Mackenzie has had his job cut out for him. I know that he's been pounding the streets too. But the SNP campaign was boosted about 3 weeks ago when one local councillor from Labour started actively campaigning for yes. She's since resigned from Labour, but they've taken that as a big boost, and they say they're very confident that large numbers of traditional Labour voters will be voting yes here.
Sally, thank you very much. We'll be back with you a little later in Inverclyde. Murray is another interesting area. If you go to the northeast of Scotland, this is an area with a big SNP heritage, certainly, and they've been sending SNP MPs to Westminster for a long time, since the days of Maggie Ewing, indeed. Ewan McElraith is there for us. Ewan, can you give us a sense of how that count is progressing?
It's really exciting, Hugh. You join us in Buckie. This is a coastal community, a fishing town, and fishing is massive here, as is agriculture and, of course, whisky. And this should be solid, fertile yes territory. There's a solid swage of SNP vote here, but you would be absolutely wrong. This is a community divided. Many people just cannot make up their mind. There's a big army camp here. There's a big RAF base at Lossiemouth. That might have an impact. There's a historical aspect. Ramsay MacDonald, Scotland's first ever Scotland's first ever Member of Parliament down there is incredibly important. And there's a turnout. The turnout has been incredible. 92% of the postal vote, 80%, 86% possibly of the ballot has been registered. And interestingly, just along the coast here is Sweno's Stone. Now, Macbeth allegedly met the three witches there who made all kinds of predictions for Scotland's future. There'll be a brave witch to predict the future tonight.
Indeed, Ewan, thank you very much for giving us a sense of what's going on in Murray, and that'll be one of the really interesting signals for us. Just a thought, really, Fiona, there on areas like Murray where you do have a strong heritage. Is there a suggestion in areas like the northeast that there will be a percentage of your supporters there who will not be backing you? I'm saying that because for viewers in other parts of the UK, they will assume that every SNP voter is voting for independence.
I think it's wrong, and I've said this before, to think about this as the politics of party. It stopped being that some time ago. So I represent, it's a West Lothian. My constituency is Linlithgow. Tamdale is my constituent. In terms of a former mining area, very tight SNP Labour, SNP at the Scottish Parliament, but Labour at Westminster. And we have a large number of Labour voters who are voting yes. Does that mean that some SNP voters may vote no? That may happen, but I also know in terms of the compensation by the far greater number of Labour voters. And if you look at the numbers that will vote yes, even on whatever polls you want to take, will be far in excess of even the landslide result we got as a party in the SNP in 2011. So it's not about the SNP, it's about the people of Scotland, and they will vote differently in different ways. And I think it's wrong. You had the assessment about the European elections at the start. I think that was a completely erroneous way of analysing what this result will do, because it's different within different streets, different communities and in different areas. And I think that for audiences that perhaps have not been as involved in this debate, it's perhaps hard to engage with.
Well, it's important to explain that. Do you buy the thinking?
I think the basic point that people are moving around is certainly the case. I think one thing that Alex Salmond understood early on in this campaign is how fundamentally different a referendum is. In a parliamentary democracy, there is a self-limiting effect on politicians. If you promise the earth and then don't deliver the earth, they kick you out the next time. This is a one-shot deal. And I think Alex Salmond, to his credit, as a politician aspiring to take Scotland to independence, but I would argue it shaped the character of the campaign, thought, I just need to be lucky once. I just need to promise anything, threaten anything, offer anything. If I get the votes on September the 18th, the deal is done. And in that sense, that shaped both the scale of the promises made by the Yes campaign, and in some ways it affected the way that the No campaign had to respond by saying, hold on a minute, let's ask some questions. That was immediately characterised as negative. To understand the dynamic of that campaign, I think you have to give Alex Salmond some credit for saying, I just need to convince enough voters on one day, and then everything changes.
I think that's a very unfair way of characterising. I think the difference in the campaigns is the Yes campaign has been more of a movement, and it's been more mass and grassroots, and certainly on the ground. I think with Better Together, very uneasy alliances. We saw that. I'm sure many of Labour's colleagues of Douglas Alexander didn't want to be seen on the same platform as Conservatives, but you brought together a strange alliance of Conservative and Labour that you wouldn't normally see in Scotland in terms of an alliance, and it was very much a kind of very constrained top-down approach, and I think that characterises the differences between the two campaigns.
Okay, just a thought there, Nick and Sarah,
What I think was striking... Sorry, go on.
What's going to be fascinating when we talk about the way this has changed politics forever, possibly, in Scotland, people involved at a grassroots level, not necessarily following party leaders. If we're looking at this huge turnout that's being reported across the country, possibly way in excess of the 85% we've been talking about, that's people who've never been involved in politics before but may remain so. They're going to ask very different questions of party leaders when it comes to future elections. They're going to operate in different ways in their own grassroots organisations. They're going to hold politicians to account, possibly in a way they haven't before. But also a lot of people who've been energised, enthused and have gone out to vote are going to be very disappointed. Whatever way it goes, a large number of voters who finally got involved in politics for the first time will not get what they wanted. And what they do with their energy and their disappointment will be very interesting.
We'll return to that, certainly, Nick.
I think there was a breaking, if you like, of this link between nationalism, as it was called, and the vote yes for independence. Clearly, there were a lot of traditional nationalists who all their life would have described themselves as such, who voted today, yes, but there are lots of people who would never have dreamt of calling themselves nationalist. And as you travel around Scotland, there were people saying, stop calling it the Nationalists, or stop calling it Alex Salmond's Yes campaign, because they saw it as part of a broader movement. Now, I think the UK-based parties were stuck slightly in a campaign that wanted to tackle Alex Salmond's Nationalists, the SNP, and they saw themselves in some ways as in a traditional election campaign, and that's why some of those messages didn't get past, didn't sink in, if you like. And he was, Douglas Alexander, I think, has acknowledged, he was fighting it not like an election. He was fighting it quite differently.
Let's pause for a second. We'll be back. We'll be talking to our guests here again in the studio, and with Douglas and Fiona, and we'll be keeping tabs, of course, on the counts, and we'll be having a look at some of those key counting centres too. But we're going to go away for just a few minutes because we're going to have a summary of the news.
Hello, I'm Carol Walker with a summary of the main news. The polls have closed and counting's underway in the Scottish independence referendum. The final result is expected shortly after 6 o'clock. No exit polls were conducted during the historic ballot, but a YouGov survey has predicted the No camp is on 54% compared to 46% for the Yes campaign. Our political correspondent Chris Mason reports.
It might not be quite the colour you're used to, or in the right country, but this Scottish Statue of Liberty does give you the gist of the campaign for independence. And yes, they've been rather fired up.
It is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to take Scotland's future into Scotland's hands.
Tonight, the nocturnal arithmetic is underway. Here, the ballot boxes arrive in Glasgow. Meanwhile, down the road in Falkirk and in Dumbarton, the adding up has begun. And who says people couldn't care less about politics? People have queued to vote. Turnout is expected to be huge. Those hoping Scotland will remain part of the UK, the No campaign, hope they've done enough to win.
It's hard to find words that capture the scale and significance to those of us here in Scotland, not just of the campaign that we've experienced, but the consequences of the decision. The choice is for us as Scots, but the consequences will be felt in every part of these islands.
An opinion poll done by YouGov today suggests Scotland won't be going its own way.
YouGov's prediction tonight is that No has won this referendum by 54%,
with yes getting 46%. We polled 1,800 people today online after they voted, people we spoke to earlier this week, so we can look at what happened to real people. And there's been a clear shift today, a small but clear shift from yes to no. And we also think that the no voters in the end were slightly more determined to turn out than the yes voters.
But so far, we have no actual results. Whilst the counters count, the pundits will speculate. The night is young. Chris Mason, BBC News.
A new video has been released showing a British man believed to be held hostage by Islamic State militants. In the video, the man identifies himself as journalist John Cantley, seen here in Syria. He says he was captured while he was working as a newspaper journalist. In the footage, Mr. Cantley is seen sitting behind a desk, dressed in orange clothes, delivering a scripted speech into the camera. Detectives in London investigating the disappearance of Alice Gross have named a Latvian builder as the main prime suspect. Police say Arne Selkens had served time in jail in Latvia for murdering his wife. He was last seen a week after 14-year-old Alice went missing in late August. The schoolgirl was last seen on the towpath that Arne Selkens used to get to work. The UN Security Council has declared the Ebola outbreak in West Africa a threat to world peace and security. In a unanimous resolution, the Council called on the international community to provide urgent assistance to the countries affected. The UN Secretary-General Ban Ki-moon warned that the number of Ebola infections was doubling every 3 weeks. Police in Thailand say they still haven't identified any suspects in the hunt for the killer or killers of 2 British tourists. The bodies of Hannah Witheridge and David Miller were found on a beach on the island of Koh Tao on Monday. Also today, Thailand's Prime Minister apologised for suggesting it's unsafe for female tourists to wear bikinis. That's it for now. Now it's time for Back to Scotland Decides.
Welcome back to Scotland Decides. In a moment, we'll be visiting a couple more of the counting centres, talking to my colleagues Nick and Sarah again, and 2 new special guests in the studio with me, and I'll be introducing them in a moment. But before that, let's have the perspective from Westminster and join my colleague Andrew Neil.
Hugh, thanks. Scotland has saturated the airways for weeks now. So let's talk about the rest of the UK, and particularly England, with 2 English MPs, John Redwood and Diane Abbott. John Redwood, the Prime Minister has said that if it's a no vote, he's going to offer substantial home rule, which what Gordon Brown calls it, to Scotland. Can he do that without major constitutional change in England?
No, of course he can't. He's got to reform the whole of the United Kingdom. It means going over to a federal model. And I say what is good enough for Scotland then should be good enough for England. So every power that is given to the Scottish Parliament should be mirrored with the same power coming to the English Parliament. But being an economical conservative, I would say that we can carry on doing both jobs as we do at the moment. But we English MPs should meet in Westminster on separate occasions from the Union Parliament meeting as the English Parliament, just the English MPs, and we should handle all the devolved matters in exactly the same way that the Edinburgh Parliament does for Scotland.
Is that a growing view on Conservative backbenches?
Yes, it's incredibly popular. A lot of my backbench colleagues are very much behind it. It, of course, builds on the Conservative manifesto pledge of English votes for English issues in the Westminster Parliament, made in 2010, and now matched by Mr Clegg, who said it on the radio the other day that the Liberal Democrats now, who weren't in favour of that, are in favour. So it seems to be the majority view. It would be quite unacceptable if Scotland was setting her own income tax rate in the Scottish Parliament and then sent members to the Westminster Parliament to set a rate for us, which Scotland wasn't going to be.
What constitutional change? If it's a no vote, we don't know, but if it is a no vote, what constitutional change do you think there should be in England?
First of all, no one's seen Mr Cameron's proposals. I don't think
Well, there are also Gordon Browns and they're your party's proposals.
I know what I'm saying.
too.
I don't even think David Cameron and Ed Miliband actually know the detail of the proposals. So it's hard to comment on what they're proposing. I think that Labour MPs will be relieved that it looks like we're going to squeak through and no will win.
Yeah, but what I'm trying to do is what's the consequences for England?
The consequence for Labour MPs is we will not be inclined to rock the boat on this.
Well, Mr Denham, John Denham, mainstream Labour MP, one of your colleagues, he said tonight it's clear that the more powers that go to the Scottish Parliament, the less you can have Scottish MPs voting on things in Westminster. That's got to change.
That's the Midlothian question. And
West
yes,
Lothian.
Sorry, you're Scottish, you would know.
Well, most people know that. Do you agree with Mr Denham or not?
I think it's inevitable.
You
I
do?
think it's inevitable. I just think that's inevitable. But the
It's
wider...
inevitable that Scottish MPs should not vote on English-only matters, you're saying?
That's the direction of travel. That's the direction
Well, you
of travel.
either do or you
Has
don't,
to
and
be.
the answer is you won't be able to. England won't accept it, and I think a lot of Scottish MPs won't want to. The SNP have always been very sensible over this and said, of course they don't want to boss England around, they want to run Scotland, not England.
We're being told that if it's a no vote, the Prime Minister tomorrow morning is going to make a major statement, not just about Scotland and more devolution there, but about England. What has he got to say to keep his backbenchers on side?
Well, he's got to say that he's going to be as fair to England as to Scotland. I'm very happy to stand behind the Prime Minister and honour his pledge to Scotland. Of course, we must keep faith with the Scottish people. They now deserve more powers because they have been offered in a referendum. But every power that goes to Scotland must be matched with the same power coming to England, and it has to be done at the England level. These are now big powers, things like fixing income tax, and so we need an English Parliament to match the Scottish Parliament.
If there's going to be major constitutional change south of the border and in Northern Ireland and Wales, as well as more home rule for Scotland, that's going to delay the whole thing, isn't it? You can't do that between now and May next year.
It's very hard to see how that can happen. It's going to be a very long, drawn-out debate. All I can tell you is Labour MPs will wish to stand behind Ed Miliband in these constitutional changes. However, that may not be true of big city leaders like Manchester and Newcastle. Those Labour leaders may take a line of their own.
All right, let's leave it there. Thanks both for joining
can I
us.
just say that
No, I'm afraid we've got to go back to Scotland Decides. Thank you.
We'll be back with Andrew Neil and his guests at Westminster a little later on. Let's have a look at some of the scenes around Scotland tonight, because the counting is now well underway. Ballot boxes have been arriving from all over Scotland, and of course that presents some logistical challenges in some of the more rural constituencies, but the boxes have been arriving. And I have to say, having been briefed several times by the electoral authorities, who've been run by a woman called Mary Pitkethly, who's in charge of this counting. It's a very impressive operation, and they seem to have covered all eventualities. So barring any recounts, which of course could change the timetable significantly, as John Curtis was telling us earlier, barring any recounts, it looks to be a very efficient process indeed so far. And what you get in lots of these counting areas, 32 of them, based on the local authority areas, you'll get some initial indications, first of all, of turnout. We've already had 1 or 2 figures, but nothing official yet. And then after that, we'll be in a position, of course, to think about the total numbers of votes involved. And then we'll be able to look forward to some of the earlier declarations. And we think that, for example, some of the smaller local authority areas, like Clackmannanshire, may well be able to get through their numbers in more quickly, more efficiently, because of the smaller numbers. So that's a sense of the activity going on right now. Those are the people working very hard to get those results in for you. Ruth Davidson is with me now, who's the leader of the Scottish Conservatives, and Hamza Yousaf, who's from the SNP, who's the Scottish Minister for External Affairs and International Development. Thank you very much for coming in.
Thank you.
Quite a night for you to be joining us. Ruth, any intelligence from your area?
Yes, I've been having lots of tweets and texts and all sorts coming in from people around the country. We've got people that are doing tallies at ballot box counts around there. The most that we've had in so far is Scottish Borders seems to be rattling through all their postal ballots and also through their ones that have been handed in. We're looking at perhaps over 70% for no there. Now, we would expect that to be high and good for us, but if that was significantly below that, I would start to be worried, and this smile wouldn't be on my face for very much longer. So, as a good Selkirk girl, I'm pleased that the Scottish Borders is coming out for no.
I'll pick up maybe in a while, Ruth, on what John Redwood was saying there, which is an interesting thing for us to contrast with your Conservative viewpoint in Scotland. Hamza, thanks for coming in too.
Thank you.
Fiona earlier was stressing that, in her view, this wasn't really a party issue. This had gone much bigger than a party issue, that there was a cross-party consensus on both sides, actually, an alliance on both sides. Do you agree with that, initially? And secondly, do you have any intelligence for us on what's going on?
Well, to take your second question, the intelligence we have is that nobody has any real intelligence.
Okay.
And you, of course, have a news programme to fill for a number of hours before anybody actually has that. So I'm delighted to be part of that non-intelligence intelligence that you're providing. No, I mean, some intelligence that is seeping through is that the west coast, the Glasgow and Greater Glasgow, North Lanarkshire, South Lanarkshire, Inverclyde, those kind of areas which have been really a real tough battle. Some important ground for the Yes campaign. We're seeing that turnout is exceptionally high as across the country, and leader of the Inverclyde Council, a Labour leader of the Inverclyde Council, saying that it's going to be a real close call and we're going to have to stay up to the early hours of the night to watch that. So that's where we are, and I completely agree with Fiona. It's been cross-party and non-party, and I think the non-party point is the important one to stress. We've had people who have no interest in politics and may well have no interest afterwards, I hope they do, but would have no interest in any type of party politics getting involved, and how refreshing. And the story and the success story of the referendum campaign has been those 16 and 17-year-olds. Phenomenal. And the debates that I've had, they have been the stars of the show.
We'll be talking to some of them in a short while. They've already contributed once or twice, but we'll be back there in a short while with our guests here. Let's go to Glasgow, to the count there, because it's such an important count. Hundreds of thousands of votes there up for grabs. And Aileen Clark is there. Aileen, what's your sense of timings there? Because clearly that's a very, very big logistical exercise.
Indeed it is. And, you know, when you understand that just short of 500,000 people registered to vote here in the city of Glasgow, you'll get some idea of the extent of the operation going on just below me here. We haven't even got to the start of the count here yet. That's just the papers being verified. We hope to get the counting actually started fairly soon. But what we're hearing is that there has been very, very high turnouts. Now, that is particularly significant here in Glasgow, because Glasgow sometimes, to be honest, has pitiful turnouts when it comes to elections. At the last Scottish parliamentary election, the turnouts at some of Glasgow's seats were as low as 36%. Most of Glasgow's seats didn't even make it into 40% or over. Now, what I'm hearing tonight from people who are here is that at some individual polling stations in Glasgow, these are not official figures, these are just anecdotal figures, but by 8:30 tonight, you're looking at turnouts like 64%, 70%, 75%. I was even told of one polling station which by 8:30 had made it over the 80% mark. Now that would be remarkable in some areas of Glasgow, and goes to show that people did decide that they did want to vote in this referendum. It was important to them to come out and vote. Even people who do not have a history of voting decided that they were going to come out and vote on the referendum. Of course, what we don't know is whose benefit that is for. Which side is going to benefit most from that? And I have to say, we're a fair bit away yet from knowing.
OK, Aileen, just a thought before I let you go there. If things go according to plan, and forgive me if you hinted on this earlier, if things go according to plan, what kind of time would Glasgow be ready, do you think?
Nobody has any clue is the honest answer, because they've never had a turnout like this before. They've never had this amount of people registered, and they've never had this amount of enthusiasm. It is, of course, a much simpler sort when it comes to it. It's only yes or no, so that might speed things up, but it's going to be well into the wee small hours, and I can't get anybody here on the counting team who's willing to make a prediction. But if I was going to be a betting woman, I would say probably not before 4.
OK, Aileen, that's very useful. Thank you very much. We'll be back with you later on, because the Glasgow result could be absolutely pivotal in this referendum. Aileen, they're talking about impressive turnout. I'm being told that the postal vote turnout in Falkirk, we mentioned Falkirk earlier, is around 96%. And that's not the overall turnout, of course. That's the postal vote turnout in Falkirk, around 96%. Another sense for you of how this is going. I said earlier that people around the world are keeping an eye on what's going on in Scotland. Not just Scots around the world, who are clearly, they have a vested interest, they have a big stake in this, but world leaders too, because it affects the governance of the United Kingdom and indeed the standing of the United Kingdom for some people. John Sopel, our North America editor, is in Washington. And John, you have some thoughts there on how interested the White House is in what's going on here.
Yeah, I think the White House hugely interested in what is going on here in Washington. And Barack Obama chose to issue a tweet last night, 11th hour intervention to call for Britain to stay united. That was his second intervention in this debate. And you know, he's an experienced politician. If he didn't want to get involved in the independence debate, he could have just steered clear of it. Instead of which, he said, we obviously have a deep interest in making sure that one of the closest allies that we will ever have remains strong, robust, united, and an effective partner. Then adding, well, of course, it's up for Scottish people to decide their own destiny. But it was very clear what Barack Obama thinks. And I have to say, Hugh, across the political elite, whether you consider that to be financiers, bankers, economists, everyone does seem to be speaking with one voice. They seem to be saying that Britain would be better united and are very fearful of the consequences if it went the other way.
John, thanks very much for now. John Sopel there for us in Washington. Very, very big interest within the European Union. That's not surprising, is it really, given the United Kingdom's membership and all the talk of whether Scotland could assume some kind of automatic path into EU membership. Gavin Hewitt, our Europe editor, joins us now. Gavin, your thoughts on the level of interest within the European Union and indeed, you know, the way this debate has conducted itself in the past few days?
Well, Hugh, there is huge interest in Europe as regards the outcome of the Scottish vote. I mean, tonight we had Flemish nationalists on the streets here in Brussels putting candles down on the Scottish flag. But of course, here in official Europe, here in Brussels, there is far less enthusiasm about the idea of nation states breaking up. Tonight we had the President of France, Francois Hollande, coming out and actually warning against the unravelling of member states. He said that Europe had been put together over 50 years and now there was a risk of it being deconstructed. And he very much made the point that this was important, not just for Great Britain, but this was important for Europe. And we had something pretty similar yesterday from the Spanish Prime Minister, Mariano Rajoy, who said these independence movements were rather like a torpedo going underwater aimed at the very spirit of Europe. And he said Europe was about integration, not about fragmentation. And of course the reason he said that is that his concern is an independence movement in Catalonia might become emboldened if there was a yes vote in Scotland. And I think that is one of the reasons there's been such a tension on what's happening in Scotland, is that there is a concern that if Scotland voted yes, then there are other areas like Catalonia, like Veneto, like Corsica, other areas that might also begin to choose to go down the path to have an independence poll.
Gavin, thank you very much. Very useful to have those views there on the views of European leaders and how they actually are paying attention to this contest. It's coming up to, what is it, just nearly midnight, really. Let's have a look at some of the front pages, because they're useful for us at this stage as well, just to give us a sense of what some of the papers are predicting. Well, that's interesting. The Times, isn't it? The No camp predicting victory. Let's stay on that image for a moment, because, Ruth, are you predicting victory?
We haven't. The head of YouGov, Peter Kellner, has. I am quietly confident that the quiet majority of Scots have spoken, but I think Humza's right to say that nobody knows anything for sure right now. And my caveats for Peter Kellner, saying that he's 99% sure that no has won is actually, I think, one of the big losers in this campaign have been pollsters generally. They just haven't had a touch or a feel for Scotland, and with a binary choice, like a referendum is, the way that they've tried to weight things, they've tried to weight it to party politics, and it just doesn't work. Okay. Just not in this referendum.
Let's go back to the front pages. I'll bring in Nick and Sarah in a moment. Let's have a look at the other front pages that we have there. There's the Herald. Scotland makes history, so you can take that any way you like, because it certainly made history in terms of this unprecedented electoral process, this contest that we've seen. So that's the Herald. Let's have a look at the Scotsman. The nation speaks. Well, it certainly has. Nobody's going to quibble with that headline. And it has spoken. We have to wait, of course, until maybe 5 or 6 in the morning to see precisely what the nature of the speaking is. Let's have a look at the Sun. OK. As up to 4 million Scots vote in Indie poll, has this bloke got inside info? Well, OK, Nick, I'm not sure what to say about that, but look, there's a variety of front pages. Can we just say there's a variety of front pages?
As some who follow a particular Twitter account will know, that's a question to which the answer is no. Credit John Rentoul, which he deserves. What is interesting is that Times headline saying the No camp are predicting victory. They are, Hugh. And they've not only just been doing it today, they've been doing it for the past 48 hours. The conversations I've been having with people inside the No campaign was a sense that things were moving their way, that they did think that there was a margin of victory there, and that they believed today. The one thing they were terrified of was that when this huge turnout came, it would be people who'd never voted before and choosing to vote for the first time and for yes. Now, as of this morning, the No campaign's view was that wasn't happening. Yes, the big turnout, but there wasn't that sense that people had suddenly rushed out in large numbers simply to vote for yes. And most of the people I've been speaking to in the No campaign all day have been predicting victory. In the Yes campaign, they've constantly stuck to the language of confidence and optimism, but that's been the, if you like, the gas, the petrol in the tank for the Yes campaign. I've not heard one person in the Yes campaign predict, yes, we think we're going to win.
OK. Well, we'll ask Hamza in a second.
I thought that was coming, yes.
Yeah, we'll ask you in a second. Because I think before we ask you, I think it's fair for us to say, well, what if it was a yes? You know, let's consider the implications of a yes outcome, because then you begin to ask some enormous questions, not just about the future of Scotland, but about the future of the rest of the UK too. So let's join Jeremy once again.
Hugh, yes, if it is a yes tonight, there are just some huge issues that will need sorting out. And I thought we could go through some of them now. So for a start, this year and next, there will have to be a Scottish Constitutional Convention. These are SNP plans. There will have to be an handover of assets from Scotland to England, from England to Scotland and vice versa. Then a common travel area needs to be set up so that Scots can go to England and Wales and Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland as well. Then there is the very vexed issue of the sterling currency union. That needs to be decided whether that can happen or not. Then Scotland needs to work out, look at that, independent membership of the EU and also independent membership of NATO as well. And finally create an energy fund. So all of that going on just this year and next if the vote is yes. You then spool forward. You get to 2016, to the 24th of March, and there's a new government in an independent Scotland. And then there will have to be a Scottish Security and Intelligence Agency running. A Scottish Defence Force will have to be running by 2016 with 7,500 soldiers. There'll be an acquisition of a naval squadron, including 2 frigates, an acquisition of an army brigade, including helicopters, the acquisition as well of 2 Air Force squadrons, including Typhoons. Enormous job of work here. And then also setting up a Scottish Foreign Ministry. So that's all at the end of 2016, 2017. And then by the end of 2018, Scotland will have full control. These are SNP plans in their white paper of welfare benefits. And then you spool forward, you look at April 2020, and you see Scotland taking full control by then. This is the plan of personal income taxes. Then you have the Scottish Defence Force in full control with more soldiers, maybe something like 15,000. And then finally, the really controversial one we referred to before, Trident out of Scotland. And then in May 2020, which in this plan seems to have come round rather quickly, you then have a second election. So a second election in Scotland, in an independent Scotland. So you get a sense from that, Hugh, just how much there is to do if the vote is yes.
Jeremy, thank you very much for underlining those issues for us, and we'll explore, of course, the no options as well in a short while. Given the intelligence that we've just received, and given that we saw that prediction there on the front page of the Times, the no camp apparently predicting victory, it's still very early, let me say. We haven't had a single result yet. So let's just be cautious, shall we? What does the Secretary of State for Scotland make of it all? Because he's with my colleague Andy Marr.
Yes, Hugh, thank you very much. I'm joined by a real, live, three-dimensional politician to talk about the future of the country. We heard John Redwood earlier on saying, whatever comes out of this, yes or no, there's going to be an English Parliament covering most English issues. Is that your view as well?
Well, look, as a Liberal, I'm a federalist. And, you know, it is now really for the English to have the debate that we've had in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. In Scotland it took us decades to reach the consensus, but we did it by building a consensus involving not just the political parties, but the trade unions, the business voices, local authorities and all the rest of it. I think that sort of conversation has to happen now in England. Whether it's an English Parliament or whether it's going to be a series of regional assemblies or more power for city regions or whatever, that's for them to decide. It's not for me to tell them.
But if England wants a Parliament, there's no way after this that Scots or anybody else can say, no, you can't have one, in which case we go to the federal Britain that the Liberals wanted before the First World War. Home rule all round.
And that really is the opportunity which we have within our grasp now tonight if we have a no vote here. Because a no vote finishes the job of devolution. It brings the extra powers of taxation and other areas that are needed to finish the job, you know, to rebalance the political